What is the hope, if any, on the Keystone issue?
Yeah, I mean, this demonstrates the asymmetric relationship right there. The fact that the Canadian government was apparently blindsided, by this decision that Biden had promised, but certainly didn't talk about as much during the campaign. That's sort of one of these top priorities for Canada to get done in the bilateral relationship. But for Biden was ultimately, at the end of the day, sort of an easy win on the domestic political front, where environmental groups in the U.S. have made Keystone this kind of litmus test for Democratic politicians, sincerity about climate change. But it shows you that this sort of something that, that for Canada was this, was this huge project, this major sort of, sticking point in the bilateral relationship. Now through, two different prime ministers over the course of, I think almost a decade now, was something that Joe Biden, at the end of the day, decided, probably in a 10-minute meeting with some of his advisors, here's sort of an easy, quick win that we could do that's going to give us some, score some points that show the environmental movement we're serious, sort of help us domestically, politically, and and we'll just deal with the Canadians as we deal with them, sort of thing. And I think in that light, when you think of how little it seems that Biden, considered sort of the Canadian position, the fact that there was no sort of, interest in, okay, once I become president, we'll talk about it and we'll see if we can reach some sort of agreement. The fact that he just did it, on his first day in office, gives you an idea that the door is probably closed to some sort of further negotiation.
Right.
Canada's talked about taking the U.S. to an international trade tribunal under NAFTA, which they can still do because, ironically, the capacity for an investor state lawsuit that was taken out of the USMCA, largely because Canada was the one that kept getting sued constantly by American companies in it. So Canada was very happy to see that go. But there's still this clause that allows it to stay in force for a couple more years under the old NAFTA system. So TransCanada will presumably take the U.S. government to court under NAFTA and see if they can get some sort of judgment or some sort of damages. The Alberta government is looking to recoup the $1.5 billion or so that they've sunk into the project. But I mean, these trade tribunals are always kind of dicey, and it often depends on which judge you draw. But I mean, it seems like a pretty narrow path at this point to getting there. And I highly doubt, unless there's a Republican president in 4 years who then reverses the reversal or something.
Right.
It just doesn't seem like there's much likelihood that this pipeline is maybe ever going to go forward.
What are some of the areas when it comes to U.S.-Canada relations where we can see cooperation, where we can see a kind of new opportunities to collaborate?
The biggest point, sort of number one, I think, is going to be that Biden is much more stable and predictable than Donald Trump. And so there won't be any sort of fear on the Canadians' part or on the part of Canadian investors investing in the U.S. that maybe, there'll be tariffs tomorrow, maybe there'll be a renegotiation of this trade deal and everything's going to go out the window. So that sort of, I think, is going to be number one, that the sort of baseline stability in the relationship, is going to be restored, and it's not going to take up, too many people's, time and bandwidth. In terms of new areas of cooperation, I think climate is probably the most obvious one, and maybe the biggest one, because you've always had this sort of difficulty in Canada of saying, well, okay, if we take climate measures that go beyond what the U.S. is doing, then do we make ourselves uncompetitive, and do we encourage companies that are looking for different regulations to sort of go to one country versus the other? And so I think being able to sort of move in lockstep the two countries together, say, okay, we're going to whether on vehicle emissions or other kind of climate measures, we're going to do very similar things, kind of at the same time. I think that gives Canada a lot of flexibility to go further on green policy than maybe it did before. And it sort of helps Biden. It gives Biden kind of a ready-made ally. So I think, if there was one area of cooperation that I'd really look for, I think that's probably it.